Thank you for joining me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin, and in this video I want to share a few quick, easy projects that I've made this fall. One is a patchwork quilt that comes together very quickly, and it goes along with a picture book that I've loved for a few years now, and I've wanted to make a quilt to go along with it. And that's the book, The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt by Riel Nason. I hope I'm saying that name correctly, R-I-E-L, Nason. And this book has beautiful illustrations, and it's about a quilt who is not like the other sheets who can go out on Halloween and go trick-or-treating and just feels kind of left out and lonely until he sneaks out and gets picked up by a little girl who ends up being very comforted by the quilt. And so he gets this cozy, fulfilling sense of purpose when he's essentially adopted by this little girl. So my daughter has been begging me to make a quilt to go along with The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt. And so that's going to be my first project. And while I was thinking about it and putting this quilt together, I started thinking of all the other books that we have here at home that have quilts in them. Some feature quilts, and that's the big part of the story. I like to collect quilt picture books. And then some just have a quilt in them, even though it's not the centerpiece of the story. And so I thought after I put this project together, I'd share some of those. So if you're inspired to make a quilt to go along with a picture book, maybe as a gift for someone, you'd have some ideas. The second project is going to be a French seam pillowcase that is quilted. I've done one like this before, so I thought I would just show this one quickly coming together. I won't go in depth, but I will link the original video I made showing how to make a pillowcase like this. The only difference between that video and what I'm doing in this one is I'll be working with directional fabric in this one. And so there's a few more tips for making it that I'll share in this video. And then the final project will be a mini quilt. It finishes at 18 by 18 inches. It's called Sweet Kitty of Autumn. And I originally had planned for it to be a wall hanging, but you'll find out as I make it that I have other plans for it. So stick around for that. There's going to be a lot in this video. There's no more time to waste. Let's get started. I'm going to walk you through my fabric choices before I start these projects. So for The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt, I'm just pulling inspiration directly from the book here. It's just simple squares. And if we look closely, there's just a range of blues from dark to light and then some low volume creams in there. The inside cover also gives you an idea, and stitches in the ditch. So I'm going to do something similar. I have this fat quarter bundle that I got from a Quilt Guild sale. So wasn't opened, but kind of got secondhand in that way, not directly from Fat Quarter Shop. It looks like it was from May of 2023. And it features Flower House Daisy's Blue Work. And so when I saw these, I already had doing this project in mind, and I thought this would be perfect. There's a great range of blues and some creams with light blue on it. So there are 12 fat quarters, and I should be able to easily cut enough 5-inch squares out of this. My plan is to have my quilt be 18 squares long and 14 squares wide. I'll make sure this is my kind of folded in half mark here, so the face will go kind of a little below the center of one side when I applique the face on. And according to my calculations, I'll need 252 squares to make an 81 by 63 inch quilt. So that's the plan for this. And then for the French seam pillowcase that I'm going to make for my daughter, I'll be using a line that's a couple years old, I believe, called Fright Delight. And I'll just be using a charm pack or 5-inch squares. I won't need all of these, but I got the charm pack and then I think I got 1.5 yards, maybe 2 yards of the main fabric. I wanted to get extra because I want to make sure that the print goes horizontally the length of the pillow, so it's not looking like this when it's on the bed, but if it's flipped over to the back side, it'll go across like this. But I just love these retro characters on here. They're very sweet. So that will be the French seam pillowcase. And the third project is going to be this little autumn wall hanging. It's called Sweet Kitty of Autumn. And it finishes at 18 by 18. And so this one I had pulled the fabric for maybe 1 or 2 years ago and just never got around to putting it together. So this is going to be the fall that these small projects finally come out of the totes and get turned into something fun. So I'm going to start with the little ghost who was a quilt by getting the fat quarters ironed and cut into 5-inch squares. I'm just using water in a mister bottle, and I'm stacking the fat quarters on top of the other, so I figure the more I iron the ones on top, the more pressed the ones below them will get. And I like working with fat quarters because they're not too large. They fit nicely on this little wool pressing mat that I have. I just have to scoot it over a tiny bit because they're a little wider than 18 inches. So I'm interrupting my cutting for a moment because I realized that with fat quarters, I'm only going to get 12 5-inch squares out of each fat quarter. And so when I was doing my original calculations, I think I was looking at yardage or something because I was anticipating a lot more. So I either need to make a smaller quilt, or I'm going to see if I have enough, because these are reproduction prints and 1930s in particular, and I'm working on a farmer's wife sampler quilt with this kind of fabric. I do have quite an assortment of blues that could work with this. So some of them are like this, where there are other colors besides blue in them. I'm gonna try to stay away from these for now if I can help it, but that is an option. I do have some of the fabrics that are actually in this fat quarter bundle, so I'll definitely be using those. So I have some creams and off-whites with the blue on them, so for sure I'll use these. And then there are some charm packs that have blue in them. So this was a charm pack I had already opened up and what's left of it. So I will pull any that are just blue, like these here, and there are all kinds of shades of blue. And I don't want to use every piece of blue that I have because I want it to be in the farmer's wife quilt still, but like I said, I'm just gonna pull the ones that have just shades of blue in it. Like this one has little pops of green in the flowers. That could work. I'll put it kind of in the maybe pile, because I'm still going to need 108 more charm squares or 5-inch squares if I need to cut them down. So I'm just kind of looking for anything that is white with blue or cream with blue, or a blue background with as little other color as possible. So like there's some blue on white. So I'm just going to pull through these, see if I have enough without having to cut into the multicolor stuff, and then I will keep cutting the fat quarters that I have. Alright, so having gone through all my charm packs, I found all these beautiful just blues, and I still haven't cut up the yardage that I have, but I have all of these cream backgrounds, and I have this one too, this fat quarter, that I think would look nice. This one I'm debating, it might be a little too bright compared to what I have. This one I really like. It has a few shades of blue, but there is green, but I thought maybe that little bit of green is what I can pull in, because I do have some more charm squares that would work beautifully. They just have little pops of green in them. So that might be the one additional color that I allow. So not these ones with the red. So I think I'll do that. And I also have actual feed sack fabric that I wanted to try in the Farmer's Wife quilt, but I might give it a go in this one because this matches beautifully with all the fabrics that I'll be using with the blues. So this will need a little bit of interfacing on the back because it is a looser weave. I think I want to test it and wash it just to make sure it holds up next to other fabrics. So I might sew a little piece of this with the interfacing with some regular quilting cotton next to it and just see what it does after drying it, because I would hate to put all this together and cut into this and then it not work. So I think that will be the plan. So this is going to take a little longer than I was expecting, but that's okay. I'd rather have it look the way I want it than, you know, fall short. So still trying to just work with what I have here. I went through my EPP scraps and my yardage totes too, and I found lots more blue I can use, as well as my 5-inch strip scrap bucket. I was trimming down bigger pieces to different sizes, including 5-inch strips, so I have plenty to get where I need to and have a variety. So I'm going to test that little swatch of feed sack fabric. I unrolled it and have this big piece, and I just cut a piece off. And when I went to my local fabric store, I had asked, because this is a looser weave, what the shop owner recommends to use it with quilting cotton. And so she had suggested this lightweight interfacing, and unfortunately I don't have the numbers for it. It's a Pellon, but I don't know what kind, but it has a bumpier sticky side here that I'm going to iron the fabric to, press it, being careful not to get the iron on the interfacing because I don't want it to stick to the iron. But I will cut it out, and then I have this scrap. If you saw my whale video, the tilde whales, I have these scraps from cutting it out, so I thought I would just sew some fabric around it and wash it, dry it, see how it holds. So first I'm going to just press the feed sack fabric. It's pretty wrinkled. And then I'm going to make sure the rough, bumpier side with the adhesive is facing up, and I'm going to attach it to the wrong side, or the back side of the feed sack fabric. And I cut it just a smidge smaller than the feed sack so that it will hopefully not get anything on my iron. So I'm just going to press it, hold it for maybe about 10 seconds. This iron doesn't get extremely hot. It is on its highest setting, but it's not as hot as a larger iron, so you might test with a lower setting first. but that is adhered onto it nicely. It's not pulling apart, and it does stiffen up the fabric. So I'm going to trim it down and then just sew some of that scrap tilde around it and just get it in the wash. So I just quilted with straight lines onto some scrap backing fabric and batting that I had, and I'm going to just do a zigzag stitch. I'm not going to bind this, but I'm going to zigzag stitch around it and wash it. And we'll see how it turns out. So while I've been cutting my squares, I did wash and run this piece through the dryer, and it turned out really nice. The feed sack fabric didn't shrink any more than the quilting cotton did. It didn't bleed. It's not coming apart or anything. So I think it's going to be safe to use this in my quilts. So I will cut up some of the feed sack fabric and incorporate it. I've got my fat quarters cut into 5-inch squares, and I've added them to the 5-inch charm squares that I already had. I stacked them with the white backgrounds on the bottom and then the blues on top. That way I don't need an exact even number, but I can kind of see if I'm getting heavy on the cream colors or heavy on the blues, and that'll just let me know which ones to pick and cut from. Also, a nice little bonus, what I have left from those fat quarters, because they're those 30s reproduction prints, I'm going to add these to my farmer's wife fabrics, and I can incorporate them into there because those are just 6-inch foundation paper pieced blocks and have small pieces, so these will be perfect for that. I've got a pile of blue and cream here, and I'm going to start sewing them together with a 1/4-inch seam in no particular order. I just want to remember that I need 14 squares per row and a total of 18 rows. Now with this kind of fabric, some of it is from Charm Pack, some of it is cut, and they're from different manufacturers. They might have pinked edges that make them a little bigger or smaller than 5 inches, and so when that's the case and they're not exactly the same size, I just kind of center whichever one is smaller as best I can, so there's not a lot of overhang on one side. I'm also just trying to alternate the colors where I don't have a lot of dark blue or a lot of creams in a row, for example, but I might have some contrasting, like a light blue and a medium blue. So other than trying not to have too many in a row of the same color, I'm not overthinking it. You'll notice I'm not cutting the threads at this point. I'm doing a lot of chain piecing. When it gets heavier, then I start cutting them apart. As my rows get longer, I start draping them over a stool. If you had directional fabric, you could put a clip on one end to keep track of which side is the left or right. When I'm down to a few of each color scheme, I start to be more selective to make sure that I'm still getting a good variety. If I have a lot of one print, I make sure to keep using that one up so I don't end up with a bunch of the same at the very end. I used my bed to set up all the strips and just try to make sure that none of the rows had joining rows that would be touching the exact same square. And I also wanted to just make sure that the distribution of dark and lights weren't too concentrated in certain areas. And I was going to try to avoid having any diagonal matches, but decided to take pity on my daughter. I told her this would be a reminder when you look at this quilt that I showed you mercy and we didn't have to keep moving strips. So this is going to be the final layout, and I'm going to go ahead and get these rows stitched together. I did go ahead and label the left end of each row with a number 1 through 18 just to make sure that they don't get out of order. And so I will press all the seams on the even rows one direction and the odd rows the opposite direction, and that way the seams will nest when I sew the rows together. So for the odd rows, I'm going to press toward the clip. And I'm just giving it a little tug so that I know the seam is really flat on the other side, that there's no bunching. And this is also a good time to just check that all the seams are even, that none of the seams went crooked, because that's always hard to find that a seam is loose after you've quilted it all together. So now for my next even row, I'm going to be pressing away from the tag, and so I'm going to put the tag on the other side. I'll just have to kind of get in a flow with my iron in the space that I have here. So it always looks like I'm pressing toward the camera, but some of these will be flipped with the first square on the opposite end. But this is just what feels most comfortable to me for pressing. So I'm back to an odd row number 3. So I'll press toward it, and I'm just going to keep at it till I've done all 18 rows. And now is also a good time to trim. If you have any dark threads that you see on a light background, trim those when you see them, so it's just one less thing to take care of later. And I am opting to use the water in my iron instead of the misting bottle, just because it's faster than having to spray each seam individually. But with this small iron, I have to refill it about every 3 rows. And I do like to just let some initial steam out before I put it on the fabric. In case there ever is rust or anything, I try to make sure the iron is empty of water before I turn it off, or spray out any excess when I'm done with it. But I do like to give it a few puffs just to make sure nothing brown or rusty comes out, and I haven't had an issue with this little one so far. I have rows 1 through 9 in this pile and 10 through 18 in this pile. I like to sew rows together about half the quilt top, and then the second half I sew separately and then join them together. That way it's just not as bulky as you sew more and more rows. All right, I've got the top put together and I'm ready to applique the face to the quilt. So I want to talk about the placement. I have this quilt folded in half right now, so it's 14 squares across, and so when it's folded in half, it's going 9 down on this side and 9 down on the back. And so I want to center it under the halfway fold. I don't want it right at the top of the fold, because I envision, if you were to put the quilt over your head like a ghost, the face wouldn't be on the top of your head. It would be down a little. So I'm going to make it a few rows down from that center fold and then center it halfway across the quilt. So that means I'm going to go about 7 squares in. Oh, I unfortunately can't fit this whole thing under the camera, but I'll give you an idea of where I'm placing it. So off camera here, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this white square is 7. And then the 8th square will be where the other eye is going. And I'm 3 rows down from the center. And so I think that's where I'm going to put the eyes. So I've cut out some circles. I just freehand drew them and colored them in with marker just to get an idea of what the size I want the eyes and mouth to be. And so I'm thinking something like this. And just real quick to give an idea of the size of these, the eye is about 3 inches tall, about 1.5 inches wide. The mouth, I mean, it's curved, but it's over 1.5 inches tall and about, looks like about 3.25 inches wide, just to give you an idea. But you would want to pick what you think looks nice. So if this is my face, I want to use applique to get it onto fabric and onto my quilt. I do not have black fabric like I originally had planned, but I do have these navy, really dark blue scraps from my Knitted Blooms quilt. And this should be just enough to give me an outer edge. I want 1/4 inch to be able to go around all of these so that I can do some needle turn applique and fold the fabric underneath the shape. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to try a new method. I saw a short from Rachel. I think her channel is called Stitching with Rachel. I love her channel. She does a lot of EPP and hand stitching, but I saw a short she did doing applique and I thought, ooh, that is a really cool idea. And so I'm going to try that here for the first time. It's a method that should help when having to fold the seam under and you're dealing with curves like in the eyes and the smile. So I'll need a little bit of interfacing. And unfortunately, the only interfacing I have has the sticky side. I don't need it to stick, but it's all I have, so I'm going to make it work. But I do want to be careful, the bumpy side here with the glue. I want to make sure I don't put that on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is take the wrong side of the fabric, have that facing up, and it really doesn't make a difference on this solid here, but if there was a print to it and it was noticeable, I'd make sure it's on the bottom. I'm going to turn my eye over because, again, it should be pretty symmetrical, but just because I want it to look exactly like I have it drawn, I'm going to make them both be face down. Since it's dark, I'm going to use this white pencil to trace as best I can. And I'll do this for all the shapes. So your template, you'll want right side facing down. Same with your fabric. There we go. And then we'll do the same. Just turn them both over. You want to just make sure that you have 1/4 inch or more on all sides of your template. Okay, so I'm done with these little paper templates. And now what I'm going to do is cut out some interfacing about the same size as my fabric. It's okay if it sticks out a little bit here. This will get trimmed down later. Okay, so this is going to be sewn together and turned inside out. And so I want the sticky side, when it's turned inside out, to be touching the seam. Again, you don't have to worry about this if you don't have the sticky side, but since I'm dealing with that, I want to make sure when I turn it inside out that the sticky side is going to be touching the seam of my fabric. So I'm actually going to start with the sticky side facing out. So it's bumpy on this side where the glue is. And then again, this would be the back side of my fabric on top. So when it's turned inside out, the sticky side will be on the inside, if that makes sense. So I'm going to just make sure all of them are sticky side out. And then I'm going to stitch slowly because I have curves here, but I have a straight stitching machine. I'm just going to stitch slowly around my drawn circle, just right on the lines. So you want to make sure you choose a walking foot that has a nice window that you can see the line as you sew. And I've also turned the speed down lower so I have a little more control. So I'm going to start my needle on my line. Just slowly. And as I get to a curve, I'm just going to pivot it just a few stitches at a time. And this will allow it to be rounded instead of sharp corners. I've also put a pin to hold it to the interfacing. And then when I get back to the beginning, I'll just go over my original line and backstitch a couple times to lock it in place there. So it looks like that. So I'm just going to do the other pieces. So I've trimmed the long threads off of both sides. And so this was the part I saw Rachel do that I thought was really neat for curves. She used pinking shears. You can see that they kind of make scalloped edges to cut her 1/4 inch around the shape. And so when we turn it inside out, that should help it just curve nicely instead of having to cut the little snips that you would normally cut around a curve. So I'm going to try it out and see how well it works. So again, about a 1/4 inch. So the next step is going to be separating the interfacing from the fabric and just cutting a little slit enough to get the scissors in, and then cut it just a little more, just enough to be able to turn the piece inside out. And so that interfacing gives the seam allowance something to hold on to. And you can use a little chopstick to poke it out. I want to make sure I have it just how I want it to look before ironing it, since I do have that sticky side. And once I iron, the interfacing is going to be sticking to the back of the fabric. So I just want to make sure it's exactly how I want it to look. And that's working really nicely, getting the curves in there. That's better. So then I'm going to just kind of press it flat with my hand. And then I'll use my iron. And I'm not going to move it back and forth. I'm just going to give it a press. And so now it's sticking to the back. But now it's nice and solid and ready to applique onto my quilt. So I'm going to do that with the other pieces as well. Just separate. Be really careful with the snips not to go through the main fabric, and just cut a little slit enough to turn it inside out. Let's see how this one turns out with those mouth corners. And it is a little fragile, this interfacing. It will be kind of gentle so it doesn't tear. Okay, and then I'm going to want to carefully tuck it because I don't want the interfacing showing on the top. I think. Since this piece is a little more finicky, I'm gonna press as I go and keep tucking. All right, so I've got my pieces where I want them, and I'm just eyeballing where to put the eyes. I'm not doing any special measuring. You could pin. I'm going to use a little bit of glue just to hold these in place. I like the glue. You can use Elmer's glue too, just a little glue stick, because it's washable glue. But I like the glue over the pin, I think, just because the pins can sometimes scrunch or shift the fabric a little. So I'll just get these all glued down, a few dots of glue. Just roughly centered. All right, I'm going to look at my thread colors here, the options. This is a dark blue. I just want to see if it's too light. Want something that'll really blend into the eye. I also have black here. I actually think the black blends a little better because this one has more of a sheen. So I'm going to use black. And I'm also going to be using a size 9 straw needle. It has a very small eye, and it's a very thin needle. And that will help me hide the stitch as well. So just going to get a piece of thread, not too long. Oh, first try. I love it when that happens. Okay, I'm going to just tie a little quilter's knot at the end, putting the needle and the thread facing each other. Wrap it around the end of the needle a few times. The more you wrap it, the bigger the knot. That was probably about 6 times or so. And then you're going to slide the knot down past the eye of the needle, hold on to the knot till you get to the end. You'll feel the little knot form at the bottom. So now I've got my hand under the top, making sure I don't have the folded side getting sewn on. So it's just under one layer of the top here. I'm going to come from under the quilt top and just into the fabric, just right on the edge. And so when I pull, the knot will stop it. And so I'm just going to kind of hold the eye in place. I might pinch it a little and stop to readjust from time to time. I'm trusting the glue to hold it enough, but I will smooth it out to keep making sure that it hasn't moved too much. But now I'm going to go down by the side of the eye. And this is a lot easier, I think, if I'm sitting down, but doing this standing, I'll do my best here. But down through the fabric next to the eye and up through the fabric and the eye. So this will give me a hidden stitch. So every time I go down, I'm going to the side of the eye right next to it, just through the layer of the quilt top. And then I'm going to come up through the layer of the quilt top and the eye. Okay, so again, I'm just going to make sure my eye is still looking good and hasn't shifted too much. I feel a little poke on my finger, and I know that's enough. I can come back up. Like I said, it would be easier to do this from a seated position. So I'm only going to do this a few times, and then I'm going to sit down so that it's a little easier. You don't want to pull too tightly. And of course, you can turn the quilt as you go. So if this were on my lap, I'd be able to turn it more easily. I just go down till I feel that little poke on my finger, and then I send it back up through both layers. And then again, I will just smooth it out from time to time, make sure it's looking good. So you can see, you can barely see those stitches. So I'm going to keep going around till I get back to where I started, and then just tie off a little knot when I get to the end. All right, now that I'm back to where I started, get my hand back under here. I've come up. I'm just going to go down and up through the eye. And this time I'm going to go under the loop. I'm not going to quite pull it all the way, and under it again to double knot it, and then just pull it tightly. Then I'll send it back down through the top and just pull it down, and I'll cut it behind the top. So here I'm going to pull the needle out, show you the back there. That's what the back looks like. So I went a little past the beginning knot because I felt like I maybe took too big of a stitch that first time around. But there's the first eye. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other eye in the mouth. All right, I'm going to try a method of basting. I've seen similar things with pool noodles done on beds and on dining room tables. I'm going to try this on my ironing board, which is not quite long enough, but there's a little bit of overhang on each side. So instead of a pool noodle, I'm using this 1.5 inch insulation foam that I just got at a hardware store. If it helps at all, it's called K-Flex, and it has a little perforated edge started, which you can just get your finger in or get a butter knife or something and just open, because it can wrap around pipes. but I'm going to use this. I've already opened the one that's hooked up here. I just tucked the backing fabric in here, and this is a cuddle fabric, so the soft part that I want showing is face down. On another foam tube here, I've tucked in my batting, and so both the backing and batting are a little wider and longer than my top. So just like a long arm machine, when you prepare your pieces, you want a few extra inches on the sides and top and bottom. So I plan on pinning the 3 layers together to sandwich them, but I'm going to just use some basting adhesive spray just to hold it in place. And you want to open a window if you're doing it inside. I just need a little bit to hold the batting. I'm going to scoot the batting up as much as I can, make sure that it's centered. And the nice thing about this is adhesive spray is it's not permanent. You can lift it and shift it if you need to. But I want it to be smooth. And then I'm going to just make sure it's draping nicely off the ironing board. So I don't want anything bunching under it. So my goal is every time I roll it, that it's going to be nice and smooth, all 3 layers. So I'm going to just straighten the first 2 layers out. And I'm just going to spray over the batting, just 1 line of spray, just enough to hold the top to it. And then the rest will be pinned. So I will roll that back in a moment, just as long as it stays put. You want to make sure that you have the top width of the quilt. At least that's how I'm loading the tubing. I want to make sure I have enough overhang of batting and backing on each side. Okay, now before I roll, if the backing or batting is trying to come out of the tube, it's not staying, because it's foam, you can also just use some pins to secure it in. Just poke them in, and it's wide enough that it's not going to come through the foam, but just every few inches or so, and stick a pin inside. Just tack it down into the foam. So I'm going to do that and just go all the way across. All right, so I've just got it pinned into the edge of the foam. When I do my first roll, I'm just making sure that everything is smooth, the top, bottom, and the batting inside. If I feel any ripples or lumps, I can tug on the backing or batting to straighten it out. So I'm just making sure everything is staying taut. No ripples all the way down to the end. And after the first couple rolls, it's not so finicky. So now I'm going to pull it toward me a little. And I'll just keep checking the fabric that's in front on the ironing board. Just keep checking that it is smooth. And adjusting my ends to make sure that it's rolling nice and straight. And then I'm going to keep doing this. And it should get easier the more I go because it's not as heavy to pull. But each time I'm just focusing on the part that's right in front of me. I'm not too concerned with what's happening down below, draping on the ground. You know, if I see that one piece is going really crooked and it's approaching, I can straighten it out. But my goal is just to keep everything nice and taut. And smooth on both sides. So it's just a matter of going back and forth and feeling what's happening underneath the top. You also want to check that there's always batting and backing sticking out past the top on both sides, that it's not going real crooked. And nothing here is permanent, so if you have to unroll and redo, it's really simple to do. The glue doesn't bond permanently. It's also a good time to catch and check for loose threads. Okay, so I think you get the idea. I'm gonna keep rolling this and I'll show you what I do when I get to the end. Okay, I'm at the end here. I've got a little bit of batting and backing sticking out below the quilt, so I have just enough and it's all smooth. So now I'm going to take these curved safety pins, look like this, and I'm just going to put them in the middle of the squares. Not every square, maybe every other, and then stagger the rows, because my plan for quilting is to quilt 1/4 inch away from both seams. So I just don't want the pins in the way. So I'm going to do every other square in one row. And I'll go down to the end, but just for time's sake, I'll show you here. And then when I do the next row, I'm going to do every other, but I'm going to do a staggered. And I'm going to make sure that I go through all 3 layers. Now I would put a chair or something behind this roll to catch it. I'll be pulling the quilt toward me as I pin, but I don't want this to roll and come undone. So I'm going to keep pinning and then I'll show you when I'm ready to roll what I do then. Okay, so I'm going to just let this roll down. I've got a little stool here to catch it. And there's some slack in it, so I can pull it toward me. If I need to give it more slack, I can. And again, I'm going to just keep smoothing it out, pulling it toward me to keep the ripples out of it, but it should stay pretty smooth from being rolled tightly. Now I'll get my pins again, and I'll just keep going, staggering as I go. And as you get further into it, you're going to have to reach far up the quilt. It's easy when there's just a short amount in front of you, but it will take a little more work to get it pinned in the middle. You know, just from time to time, smooth it. But I'm just going to keep going, pinning across and unrolling and pinning a little more, and then we'll be ready to quilt it. So to quilt it on my machine, I'm going to roll it kind of like a scroll on both sides. That way I can sew, again, 1/4 inch away on each side of the seam, and then I can just unroll as I go. And then this side will stay a little more contained in the throat of the sewing machine since I don't have a lot of space. And then I'll roll this side back up, flip it around, and sew the other side. I did stitch the quilt top down to the batting and backing just a really like 1/16 of an inch or less, just to hold it down and make trimming it easier and to keep it flat, keep it from bunching. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim along the quilt top now before I add the binding. So here is the finished quilt, and obviously I can't fit the whole thing in frame. I'll have to put a picture up of it, or even better, have my 7-year-old model how it looks wearing the quilt, because she does love to do that. But I absolutely love this quilt. Even if it didn't have the face on it, this simple patchwork quilt, it came together so quickly, and the results are just stunning if you use fabrics that you love. I am a big fan of blue and white quilts, and these ones just all play so well together with all the shades of blue. And then using the cuddle fabric on the back, I did not know what I was missing out on. I had heard that it's hard to use, it can be messy cutting it up, and I did get a little bit of that trimming it, but it's just the initial cutting. It's not like the whole thing is shedding, which is what I was kind of afraid of, and that wasn't the case at all. It is so incredibly soft, and it shows the quilting beautifully. I think if there was an edge-to-edge design on it, that would show up so nicely and look so cool on the back. But everyone in the family has tried to claim this as their quilt, so I think I'm going to have to make some more like this, or at least use more cuddle fabric on the back. I did put a layer of batting in between the top and the cuddle fabric just to give it a little more structure. Even though the cuddle fabric is thick, I heard that it can still be pretty floppy if you don't use batting inside. So I think this is just the perfect texture. It doesn't feel too heavy, but it keeps you nice and warm. The stitching, I ended up using 3 bobbins of thread, and none of them were the same. And that's okay. I think it added to the scrappy look of the quilt. If you look closely, there's some that have more of a sheen to them. They're all kind of a dark shade of blue, but I did notice that some brands, the stitches showed up a lot nicer and smoother, and then some were a little tighter. So I found that interesting because I used the same setting. I used a 3.0 stitch length when I was sewing on each side of the seams here. And so, yeah, it took about 3 spools of thread to quilt this whole thing. I wanted to make sure, because the package of batting that I used, the Warm and Natural, said there should be quilting at least every 4 inches on it. So I made sure to stitch a 1/4 inch away from both sides of the seam in order to bring the quilting closer together. The little face, because it's appliqued on, could easily be picked out someday if someone just wanted the quilt and not to have the little ghost who was a quilt on there. I did not stitch over the mouth. I probably could have, because it's the dark thread, but I didn't want anything showing up on the face. So that is something to consider if we ever take the face off. That probably want to go and stitch down those vertical lines there. But that was the only place that intersected with the seams. So as I mentioned before, I wanted to share some other picture books that I think would accompany a quilt wonderfully if you wanted to make a pairing to give as a gift for someone special. So what I thought I'd do is I'll share the title and author, and I'll show you a picture of the quilt inside. Like I said, some of these feature the quilt, that's the center of the story, and then others just have a quilt in them. And I like to just share a line or 2 from each just to give an idea of the writing style of the book. So let's go ahead and dive into these wonderful books. Some of them have such gorgeous illustrations. So I'm gonna grab my stack and we'll get started. So I already mentioned The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt, but there's a follow-up book that is a more recent release, The Little Ghost Quilt's Winter Surprise. And in this one, it doesn't say Christmas in it, but the quilt is traveling outside because he's warmer in the wintertime, and all his little sheet friends from the first story are inside cold. And so he catches glimpses of Christmas. And again, the illustrations in this book are just lovely. There's a lot of what looks like black and the sepia tones, but then there's pops of color. And so he just experiences the wonders of Christmas time and winter. There's all the trees and the lights, and there's a menorah in there. And so just all the holidays going on during winter. And he wants to bring that joy and spirit to his friends. And so he finds a way to kind of bring the festivities to his friends. The little ghost didn't like being different. His mom told him he had an ancestor who was a checkered tablecloth, and his great-grandmother was an elegant lace curtain. Everyone said she was the most beautiful ghost they'd ever seen. Even knowing that, the little ghost didn't feel any better. He wished he was just one fabric and not a whole bunch of squares sewn together. The other ghosts called him Scrappy, and he didn't like that. He flew down street after street and saw families and friends together. Outside, they were singing songs, playing in the snow, walking in groups, admiring the lights, and putting out even more decorations. Inside, they were trimming trees with ornaments, baking cookies, and making cards and crafts. It gave the little ghost quilt a warm, wonderful feeling in his batting, but he also felt a sadness. So that is The Little Ghost Quilt's Winter Surprise by the same author, Riel Nason. The next book is called The Promise Quilt by Candace F. Ransom. And this is more of a historical fiction book about a girl whose father goes off to fight in the Civil War and doesn't return. The father had promised his daughter that she would go to school, but the soldiers had burned the school and it needed to be rebuilt, and they didn't have money for books and slates. And so her mom was going to make a quilt to raffle and get money for books. But then I realized the quilt wasn't just for me. It was for all the children who wanted to go to school and make their mark in this world. Slowly, I slipped off the shirt. "Use this," I said. "Addie, are you sure?" Mama asked me. "This is all we have left of Papa." "We have memories," I said, and Aldine nodded. Mama hugged me. "I promise to save you a little piece. Red will look nice mixed with the blue border." This book also has some interesting historical information in the back. It mentions the checkered board print that the quilt was done in, and that it was called Lee's Surrender, that it was a popular pattern. It says, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant on April 9th, 1865. The table on which Lee signed the document was rumored to have had a checkered top. As soon as the two generals left the room, all furnishings were stolen or purchased for souvenirs. We now know that the table was gray marble with a mahogany pedestal. It's on display in the Chicago Historical Society. Yet Lee's surrender, a checkerboard pattern, became a traditional quilt and coverlet design after the war. So some cool information in the back, but again, if you know someone who loves history or the Civil War in particular, or Civil War style prints, this might be a good book to accompany that with that simple checkerboard pattern. This next book also features quilting, The Quilt Maker's Gift. Again, I hope I'm saying these names correctly, but the authors are Jeff Brumbew and Gail DeMarkin. And this one I think is a pretty well-known book, but it's about a greedy rich king who has all the gifts and just most beautiful items, more than anyone has. And what he doesn't have is the beautiful quilt that a famous quilt maker makes, and he wants one from her. So the quilt maker makes a deal with the king that she will make him a quilt if he gets rid of his things and gives them to others. And so the more he gives, the more his quilt grows. And so he ends up with a beautiful quilt in the end, and he is also changed on the inside from the experience. So it's a wonderful story about generosity and how giving just makes us happy, brings us true happiness. "What's this?" cried the king. "As I promised you long ago," the woman said, "when the day came that you yourself were poor, only then would I give you a quilt." The king's great sunny laugh made green apples fall and flowers turn his way. "But I am not poor," he said. "I may look poor, but in truth my heart is full to bursting, filled with memories of all the happiness I've given and received. I'm the richest man I know." "Nevertheless," the quilt maker said, "I made this quilt just for you." So that is the quilt maker's gift. I was so excited when I saw that Patricia Polacco had a book about quilting, The Keeping Quilt. I love her stories. I read several of them with my students, but this one, because it focuses on quilting, is one that I just have at home outside of the classroom. This is actually more of an autobiography for her. It's the story of her family and a special quilt that marks a bunch of special events in her life and her family's life, and it celebrates the family's history. I like the illustrations in this book, how all the fabric that ends up in the quilt is in color and the rest is in black and white. I'll read this one. "When my grandma Carly was born, Anna wrapped her daughter in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carly was given a gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold, so she would never know poverty. A flour, so she would always know love. Salt, so her life would always have flavor. And bread, so that she would never know hunger." So beautiful illustrations and wonderfully told. I have to go grab some more. So Phyllis Root is the author of The Name Quilt. It's another book celebrating family stories. The quilt in this story is made up of articles of family's clothing, and so the little girl will sit with her grandma at night and point to different patches on the quilt, and names are embroidered on them, and she'll say, "Tell me about this person and this person." And so grandma shares the stories with the little girl, and one day a storm comes along and destroys the quilt that was hanging on a clothesline, and the little girl is devastated but learns that the stories are in us, and they end up rebuilding and making a new quilt with her name added. So it's a wonderful reminder to pass on stories to your descendants and that they keep living through them. And the quilt is just a good way to capture those stories and get those stories flowing and talking about them. Summer evenings after Grandma and Sadie counted cricket calls and drank lemonade and wished on the first star, they worked on the quilt. By the end of the summer, they had stitched together all the scraps and sewed all the names from the quilt the wind took. On a lighter but sweet note, we have The Pokey Little Puppy and the Patchwork Blanket by Jean Chandler. I just loved The Pokey Little Puppy when I was little and all those stories, and so I didn't have this one growing up, but I was excited to find it because I liked those little golden books. But this is just about how the pokey little puppy doesn't listen to his mom and keeps taking his favorite blanket outside to play, and it gets smaller and smaller as it rips and tears, and she can't repair it any longer. And so his siblings are kind enough to give him a piece of their blanket, and so the mom is able to put all the pieces together to make him a new patchwork blanket. It never actually calls it a quilt, but that's essentially what it is. So that's a really cute one, maybe for a younger reader. And when the poky little puppy woke up the next morning, he found a beautiful patchwork blanket covering him. "Oh," he said, "this is the most wonderful warm blanket. Thank you, everyone. I'll take very good care of it." This next one is simply called The Quilt by Ann Jonas, and it's about a girl who receives a new quilt and she notices all kinds of familiar fabrics in it, from clothing to even the fabric that her favorite stuffed animal is made out of. And so she's looking and remembering all these different events as she's looking at this quilt. But it's not just about the memories the quilt keeps. She also hides under it, and it feels like it's a whole other world. And so she's kind of going on adventures under the quilt too. The little scraps of fabric make her feel like she's in different places. So it's a cute story, just showing how memories and imagination can be found in a quilt. This is her favorite stuffed animal, Sally, whom she's looking for throughout the book. "If she hid here, I'd never find her. Sally!" This is a lovely story called The Moon Quilt by Sunny Warner. It's about an old lady who falls asleep on her front porch, and she dreams of her husband who was lost at sea, dreams of him when he's younger, and has these beautiful memories. And so when she wakes up, she starts quilting those memories. And then she's quilting things that she enjoys in her present life, like gardening and her little black cat. And so all these different memories and dreams and things she loves are all captured in a quilt, and it kind of becomes a record of her life. And so it's a nice one just to show the power behind a quilt, how they really can be used to show what was really important to us or who was really important to us. She dreams he is sailing in his fishing boat on a dark rainbow that goes up from the sea to the moon. Sunlight is slowly spreading from the edge to the full face of the moon. As he sails toward it, she sees he is growing younger and younger. And the last quilt-centered book I'm going to share is The Patchwork Quilt by Valerie Flournoy. Again, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I absolutely love this one. It's about a grandmother who's sharing with her granddaughter about how quilts tell a story and they can talk to you and convey those stories to you. She's gathering fabric from her daughter's Christmas dress and her granddaughter's Halloween costume and her grandson's favorite red shirt. And so there's all these stories and memories that go into the quilt, and she wants to make a masterpiece and knows it's going to take a long time. And her granddaughter is really eager for her to finish the quilt. But when the grandmother gets sick, the granddaughter and mother start to pitch in and help. And then the rest of the family also joins in and sees how it's done. So they really want to help the grandmother finish her masterpiece before it's too late. But it does have a happy ending. And again, it just shows the magic in quilts and how they do tell a story. And that was the whole reason I named my channel A Quilting Tale, because I do believe that all quilts have a story. And so that one just fits in so well with how I view quilts. So that one is a personal favorite. "A quilt won't forget. It can tell your life story," she said. Now I'm going to just quickly go through. I won't go into what all of these are about, but I will point out the quilts in them. These are not quilt-centered stories, but they're just books we have at home, which, by the way, just from a teacher point of view, I think reading is one of the most special, wonderful things that you can do with your child or grandchild, especially picture books. Just sitting down instills such a love for reading and makes it enjoyable and just helps kids use their imagination. And so I don't think you can have too many books. I had so much fun digging through our picture books looking for these, and my daughters were helping me. It was just fun trying to spot the quilt or remember which stories that might have involved bedtime or somewhere where there might have been a quilt. And so I found a stack of them here. But whether it's library books, used books, brand new books, just surround your kids with literature and instill that love of reading with them. My middle school age daughter still loves to sit and be read to, picture books and all. When I'm reading to the youngest, she will come down from the top bunk and just sit by me and want to listen. And so I just think it's one of the most special, memorable bonding things you can do with a child. So that's just my little spiel for reading and why I think combining picture books and quilts just go hand in hand. So this one is The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes by Du Bois Hayward. There is a lovely applique quilt in this one. This would be a great book for Easter. And something I noticed, I know I wasn't going to talk about all of these books because I don't want this video to take forever, but I'm making the Farmer's Wife quilt. You may have seen some of those videos. It's based on 1930s feed sack fabrics and those replica prints from that era. This book was written in the 1930s, and so the colors in it really just remind me of a lot of the colors in that Farmer's Wife quilt that I'm making. So I just thought that was kind of fun to see the copyright year. I have a few Christmas books in this pile. A Very Merry Christmas Prayer by Bonnie Rickner Jensen. And that features just a sweet little patchwork quilt of all kinds of colors. Lots of bright, vibrant colors in that one. And then The Night Before Christmas also features a quilt. This is by Clement C. Moore, and it's The Night Before Christmas, the classic edition. It's a board book. Corduroy by Dawn Freeman is a great classic story, beautiful illustrations, and there is a really scrappy patchwork quilt when Corduroy finally gets a home. Another Christmas one is Bear Stays Up for Christmas by Karma Wilson. This one is kind of similar to the Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt. It has a lot of blue, but instead of white, it has pops of yellow and some really soft greens. But it's also just a basic patchwork quilt, so could be put together just like the one I showed you today. The Bernstein Bears and Mama's New Job. Mama actually opens a quilt shop in this one. The quilts, surprisingly, aren't so much the focus as when a parent goes back to work and you're used to them being at home. So that's a good book to, if someone is transitioning, if a parent is transitioning back to work and the kids are having a hard time with it, it's a good story. I loved the Bernstein Bear books growing up. I learned so much from them. This is a beautiful book. It's called Finding Winnie, the True Story of the World's Most Famous Bear. So this is about a real bear who inspired Winnie the Pooh. And there is just a yellow and white patchwork quilt on the inside here, but this is such a sweet and fascinating story. This one has probably some of the most gorgeous illustrations. They could just all be paintings that you hang on a wall. It's called All the Places to Love by Patricia McLaughlin. Paintings by Mike Wimmer. I think it's worth mentioning. And one of the very first pictures features an EPP quilt with all those little hexagons. This is such a beautiful story about passing on and sharing all your favorite places and hoping that your descendants will love those places too. So great book about family and legacy. And then the last one is Uni the Unicorn. Oh, and this one is by Amy Krauss Rosenthal. And another simple patchwork quilt, lots of pinks, purples, greens in this one. This is a more popular modern kids book. It's fairly newer. And it reminds me, I have a kit that goes with this book. There's Uni the Unicorn fabric. So even if you don't pair a picture book with a quilt that you make from scratch, there are many fabric lines that carry fabrics inspired by books. I know I have made a quilt featuring fabrics from The Little Engine That Could. I'll pop a picture of that one up. And there are lots of fairy tale fabrics. I know Riley Blake has several. I've seen Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Beauty and the Beast, I think Sleeping Beauty. There's been several of them. And so you can also look for book characters. Peter Rabbit's a popular one that I see a lot, Winnie the Pooh, and just pair those fabrics with those books. That's another idea. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing some ideas, that there might be some inspiration there. And if you know of other picture books that either feature quilts or have a quilt in it, I would love to get a bigger list going in the comment section. So feel free to leave a comment of any stories you know that have quilts in them. So let's move on to the second project now, which is the quilted French seam pillowcase. As I mentioned, I made a tutorial about how to make this pillowcase before, so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here, but I will say something different this time is I'm using directional fabric. If you have non-directional fabric, 3/4 yards of your backing fabric will be sufficient. If you are using directional fabric and it runs directionally from selvage to selvage, like mine does here, you're going to need approximately 1¼ yards, or you need at a minimum 44 inches, and that's with no wiggle room. So maybe a little more than that. I happen to have 1.5 yards of this, so this should be plenty. What I'm going to be doing is on the selvage side, this is going to be the height of my pillow, I'll call it, from top to bottom of the directional print. I want 22 inches. So I'll measure 22 inches and then I will cut across. Now, as far as how wide to make it, I'm going to say about 27.5 to 28 inches should be enough. So across, we'll make a cut at about 28 inches. So you're going to have a chunk of it, from here to the other selvage left over. You're going to want 2 pieces like that. So that's why I said at least 44 inches, because then above that you'll cut another piece. So it's doable to do it with a directional print. You're just going to need a little more yardage, and you're just going to have to be a little more intentional with your cutting. So I'm going to get this pressed and cut to the sizes that I need, but I also want to talk about the charm squares. So I'm going to open up this Bright Delight charm pack. And I want to choose 30 prints. I'm going to make 5 rows of 6 going across. So there is quite a mix in here. I'm just going to kind of pull some out, and I don't know if there'll be enough. I'm sure there'll be some duplicates. So I'm just going to kind of put similar fabrics together and similar colorways. So it looks like the major colors are going to be black, white, gray, and orange. Oh, and then at the very bottom, there's this interesting mix here, kind of a collage of images. So those are all going to be, oh, and this one actually is all intact. So I might use some of those too, for sure. The ones that are intact or different. These ones are kind of the same, but this one's more intact. So we will put those two in for sure. Maybe this one, there's some different prints on there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull 30. All right, I think I like this layout here. I staggered the 5 rows a bit so I can just see it all in one bird's eye view, what it's going to look like on this small space. So I tried to make sure there was good contrast, not too much, black all concentrated one area or orange in one area, and no motifs that are touching. There might be some that are diagonal, but they're different colors and things. So I like this look. I'm going to go ahead and start sewing the rows together and then attach the rows. When I press the rows seams, I'm going to make the odd rows have seams going in one direction and the even row seams pressed in the opposite direction, so they'll nest when I join the rows. And again, this is all on a much more in-depth tutorial in another video that I'll link below. For the sleeve of the pillow, I found this gray fabric with some jack-o'-lanterns on vines here, and it's called Spooky Night by Grace Pop for Studio E. So I need 9 inches by width of fabric for the sleeve, and then for the flange I'm using this Timeless Treasures fabric, and it's black with a little bit of gray flecks on it, so it looks kind of distressed. I don't have a solid black, so I thought this one would be nice with these prints here. So I'll use a 2.5 inch by width of fabric strip of this one. Now I'm ready to make the pillow tube, and for this you're going to need your sleeve, which is 9 inches tall by width of fabric, and then you need your flange, which is a 2.5 inch strip that's cut by width of fabric and pressed in half so that the open sides are along the edge of the sleeve. I've got the body of my pillow, the back and the front, closest to me, with the quilted front side on my right. I will link Stephanie's pattern from Quilt Addicts Anonymous. It's a free pattern, and the big difference between how she does it and this process is that she uses one continuous piece of body fabric. So mine is more patchwork with the 5-inch squares and the quilted front side of the pillow. So it's more steps and has a different look, but the process of putting it together is the same. So I just want to give her credit for that process, and I will link what I can in the description of this video. But how you put this tube together, like I mentioned, you're going to line up the flange to the bottom of your sleeve, and it's going to be a little longer than the body of the pillow. So you just want to make sure it's centered so you have some sleeve and flange sticking out on each side. Then you're going to take the pillowcase and just turn it so that it's wrong side up and line it up with the edge of the sleeve and the flange. Again, make sure there's enough sleeve and flange sticking out on both sides of the body. And I'm going to move it down a little because the next step is going to be to kind of roll the body up inside the sleeve. So I'm just going to pull the body forward, being careful not to get it on the edge because that's where I'm going to be sewing. So I don't want to sew the body by mistake. I'm just going to fold it over once. Try to keep it all smooth. Then I'll fold it over again. And then maybe one more time. Just want it all contained, but still making sure that it's lined up with the edges. Then I'm going to pull the top portion of the sleeve over and line it up with the edges. So what I end up with is this little sandwich that has one end of the sleeve, the flange, the body of the pillowcase, and the other side of the sleeve. And so if you have to adjust how you rolled the body, you can't quite pinch it together, you might need to roll the body tighter. But you want to make sure all those pieces are together and aligned, and then you're going to start pinning. And just checking that all the pieces are aligned. You're going to pin both ends, and I start at the center. And I think the more pins you use, the less shifting there is. So you can be generous with the pinning. Just make sure everything catches, because you're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch down these gathered edges. And so I'm going to finish pinning. So here's my finished tube, and you should leave at least an inch between the edge and where you're rolling the body of the pillow, because when you fold it over, especially on this thicker side with the quilted pieces, you're going to want to make sure that you don't catch the body in there, and so you have enough room to pin and sew your 1/4 inch seam. This side that isn't quilted is much easier to pin. So if you don't do the quilted patchwork option, it is much easier to make these cases, but still very doable. So when I sew, I'm going to back stitch at one end, sew a 1/4 inch down the pinned edge, and back stitch on the other end. And then the fun part is unrolling the pillow. So we will do that next. All right, I've got my tube sewn, and I just had checked both sides to make sure it looked like everything caught. And so now, because it's back stitched, I should be able to pull it out without the stitching coming undone. So just go kind of slow, and you can see how it turned out. So then you're just going to make sure that everything caught. And once you're sure of that, the next step is going to be to press a nice crease in this to make it flat. Press the flange down, just kind of iron the body of the pillow a bit, because it does get a little wrinkled in that tube. Then there's some trimming and more sewing, which I'm not going to show that part. I'm going to cut to the finished pillow, because I did a video showing the whole process, making a pillow the same way, just different fabrics. So I will link that if you're interested, but because I'm making 3 projects, I don't want this video to get too long. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut to the finished case now. Here's the finished French seam pillowcase with the patchwork. And I love the glow-in-the-dark thread on here. It kind of blends in, but when you look up close, you can see it just hugging each side of the seams. That'll be really fun in the dark. And It hasn't been washed yet, so I anticipate it gets a little more snug in the wash, but it fits great and there's still room for the standard size pillow. And here is the back side, also very cute. The flange got tacked down so it won't flip up or get too crinkly when it's washed. And the inside, because of the way it's sewn, all the seams are enclosed in another seam. So I don't expect any unraveling or fraying as it goes through the wash. But that was a really fun one to make. Another festive Halloween pillow that my daughter is going to enjoy. And so now there's one project left, and that is the Sweet Kitty of Autumn wall hanging. All my pieces are cut for the Sweet Kitty of Autumn wall hanging now. And I didn't realize when I bought the pattern how small of a wall hanging it is. 18 inches by 18 inches. It could even be a little table topper maybe, but it's a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. But the number of pieces for it, if you look at this, is just unbelievable. I counted 55 alphabetties to label, and so it's not even 55 pieces, just labels. There are, sometimes 4 pieces per letter, and the pattern does not letter the pieces. So what I ended up doing, just to take some confusion out for me, is I looked at how the pattern was organized. So it kind of builds section by section, like the large pumpkin, the kitty head. So I put all the pieces together that go to that section, and that's how you're going to stitch these, just section by section. And that way I have fewer letters to contend with. So if I'm looking for a specific piece, I can look back at the pattern, and if I'm looking for, the 2.5 inch square, I can look under that section and see which letter it was. And there's only a few letters per section. So I thought that would be more manageable than pulling out my ruler and remeasuring them every time I go to assemble, because some of the pieces are very close in size within each section. There are some unusual measurements, like 3/4 inch squares and rectangles that have a length of 2 3/8 inches. So there's some careful measuring that has to happen. But the nice thing about patterns like this that have a bunch of little pieces is that it seems to go quickly. You get through the steps quickly because there's only a couple pieces per step. And so I feel like this will be one that will quickly feel like progress. But I won't lie, cutting all these pieces out took me a few days. It's my least favorite stage of quilting, is the cutting. And so this one definitely, I needed some breaks. And so after several days, I am ready to start assembling. So let's get to it. So the first section is the leaf blocks. And so I have my pieces. I'm going to have a red and a green leaf. So I have those pieces. And then there's another section of cutting that was leaves and the area around the leaves as far as the background pieces. So that's how I knew I'm going to be working from these 2 piles. And there are lots of individual pieces in here. Now, for the sake of this video length, because there are 3 projects in here, I'm not going to show every step, but I'll show you some of it coming together, as well as the final wall hanging when it's finished. Here's where I'm at so far, about halfway through, I'd say, with the directions, and my pile of pieces is getting considerably smaller, so that's exciting to see. getting ready to assemble the small pumpkin unit. So these 3 pieces will get sewn together as well as these 2, and then those rows will join. But one thing I make sure to do when these little stitch and flipped pieces are going to have to join, to help them nest, I make sure to press them in opposite directions. So this one, for example, I press toward the main fabric, whereas this one is pressed toward the little stitch and flip square. And so that'll help it really line up and get a nice point when I sew the rows together. I've got all the main pieces made and ready to stitch together. I think it's going to look so cute. I'm real anxious about joining these 2 pieces because right now it doesn't look very aligned, but I know if I get that 1/4 inch just right, it should make a straight line here, and then these pieces should form at a point. So I'm eager to see if it's pieced accurately enough to come out that way. So these 2 pieces will go together, these 2, and then these 2 as well. And then once I sew these 4 pieces together, these 2 rows, I'll attach this one off to the side and then sew down the middle here. And that will complete the center, and then I just will need to get the borders on. My Sweet Kitty of Autumn mini quilt is finished, and to finish it, I just put the backing and batting in between here, the backing with the right side down, and I just spray basted it. And for quilting, I just echoed the outlines of the shapes using a cream colored thread. It shows up in some spots better than others. And this is the same batting that came from the package that I used for the little ghost that was a quilt and the French seam pillowcase. So I still have a little bit of that batting left, but I was able to use it on this as well. And it requires quilting with a minimum of a 4-inch distance. So some bigger spots like this, I kind of echoed the shape around. It's very subtle, and same thing on the pumpkin. I made some lines go down. But for the most part, I just echoed around the shapes, and then I also went along the border on the cream fabric. My intention was to make this a wall hanging and put little squares pressed in half diagonally, and then sew them in the binding on the upper corners to hang with a wooden dowel. But I ended up leaning this up against an old throw pillow that happened to be 18 inches, a square pillow, which is what this finishes as. And so I decided I'm going to turn this into a pillowcase to cover a throw pillow, which I will cover in another video how I'm going to do that. But I just wanted you to see the finished mini quilt for right now. Here's that finished mini quilt. It's on its way to becoming a pillowcase. I just need to get the binding on it. So I'm going to take the pillow form out and attach the binding like I would a regular quilt. That will be a future video because I know this one has been really full. So I'm going to leave it here, but I wanted you to see what it looked like when it was finished, as well as the envelope backing. So in my next video, I will share this one, how it turns out, and how I made this pillowcase and how I attached the binding. So look forward to that one. I hope you've enjoyed seeing these projects come together today and that they've given you some inspiration or ideas or just some joy seeing a project come together. That's what makes me happy to have this channel and share it. And I thank you for liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.